Atlanta Braves fans can finally rejoice. Their suffering has been released. Now, which fan base is suffering the most and could really benefit the most from a championship in 2022? This is the type of question we're going to answer on this episode of Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB. Thank you for making Locked On MLB your first listen, as we're available on all podcasting platforms. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. As you can tell from the graphic right there, please call me Sully on today's episode, which is being dropped on the weekend. We're doing this on the 13th day of November. It's a lucky day, and 2021 is still the year. The season's over, but the year isn't quite over yet. And here on Locked On MLB, the podcast we talk about baseball all year long, we're going to be talking about the suffering index, which is something that I created on the old podcast, Sully Baseball Daily, to address trying to figure out and quantify fan suffering. The Atlanta Braves fans were amongst the most suffering going into this year. They've been relieved. Who now needs that series the most? Follow us on all the platforms. We're also here on YouTube for those of you watching. And you can follow us on Twitter, Locked On MLB Pods. Same handle for Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Hey, want to apologize. Again, I've not been getting the episodes up with the frequency as I would like. That is going to be different. We are going to have a full slate of episodes. I'm going to try to play a little catch-up. And if I came up one episode short this week, then guess what? We're going to have 6 next week. I'm going to make sure we average 5 episodes a week. So if that means that I missed a week or I only got 1 episode in that week, next week you're getting 9. You're getting 9. We'll play 2. So because I love doing the podcasts in the off season, because if you want to talk about baseball, I don't care about. It's Tom Brady. Tom Brady's still playing, right? Yeah, he won a Super Bowl. I don't care about the other sports going on. You like your baseball. And if we're going to have a lockout, we really don't talk about anything but labor stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about stuff in the off season. Now, for those of you who don't know what the suffering index is, and I can't sit here and pretend that it is something that has swept the nation. Excuse me, I just adjusted my camera a little bit there. After the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, I tried to figure out which fan base was suffering the most, because growing up, from childhood right up until 2016, there were 3 easy answers for which fan base was suffering the most. You had the trio of fan bases that were waiting forever for a World Series title: the Cubs, the White Sox, and the Red Sox. Cubs hadn't won since 1908. White Sox hadn't won since 1917. Red Sox hadn't won since 1918. Yankee fans were always willing to remind Red Sox fans that it had been since 1918. And it's so funny, as we're approaching in a couple of years the 20th anniversary of the 1918 chant being over. That was ubiquitous when you went to a Yankee Red Sox game at Yankee Stadium. I know, I went to my share of them. 1918 was a staple of a cheer. And so you had those 3 franchises that had their fan bases waiting forever for a title. Well, they've all won. And, the Red Sox in 04, White Sox in 05, Cubs, I thought were going to win in 08. And it would have been amazing if the Cubs did indeed win in 03. Because first of all, Dusty Baker would probably be in the Hall of Fame. Hell, Sammy Sosa might be in the Hall of Fame for all we know. And if you would have had Cubs, Red Sox, White Sox 3 straight years. Didn't happen that way. Instead, we had the 2 most suffering fan bases colliding in 2016 as the Indians and the Cubs faced off. And so I created a formula. I understand this formula is flawed. I understand this formula doesn't account for everything. But keep in mind, this is not being used in arbitration cases, nor is this a legally binding podcast. This is your pal Sully coming up with stuff to talk about and maybe throw debate stuff out into the ether. And there are some things in this method that I created that very clearly show some flaws, but I tried my best to come up with a formula to figure out which fan base is suffering the most. And I tried to take a bunch of things into account. Now, after the Cubs won and their fans were relieved of all suffering, and as I mentioned to Braves fans last week, the true sensation of winning this title isn't going to happen now. It didn't happen in the parade. It's going to happen the next time you feel let down by your team. In some year coming forward, Braves fans are going to feel crushed by a loss, but it won't be as crushing because you had this championship relieve and release all of the tension and anger from the past years. And the Braves had a lot of frustrations. I'll get to that in a second. When the Indians lost the World Series, they shot to the top of the suffering index. But then I thought, wait a minute, what about Washington fans? Washington fans hadn't seen a World Series title since 1924. And the only other championship that went through in terms of baseball that went through Washington was the Homestead Grays in 1948, which is still the same number of years as the Cleveland Indians. And they had two teams ripped from their bosoms and were without baseball for 30-something years. So shouldn't that add to their suffering? I thought, yes, it did. But then the Nationals took care of that by winning the title in 2019. And so I came up with a formula. And I'll tell you what the formula is. In the first half, I'm going to explain what the formula is. The second segment, we're going to go through the results up to date through the end of the 2021 season. But I tried to take into account a couple of things, and explaining the formula will hopefully make it kind of clear. The first thing I take is the number of years since a team's last World Series title. Just simple. Because that seemed to be the main thing that people talk about for a frustration of a fan base. And so, if we're talking Cleveland's now been set, going into the 2022 season, it'll be 74 years for Cleveland. It's been 33 years for Oakland, which is really terrifying for me. Sorry, I had to adjust the camera again. That's really terrifying for your pal Sully, because I was a senior in high school when the A's won their last World Series title, and seeing that that's 33 now, file that under yikes for me. So I take that. You take that number, but that can't be the only factor for suffering. So I add to that the number of years since a team last won a pennant, and I divide that by 4. And the reason I do that is if it's also been a long time since your team has even appeared in a World Series, that also adds to a suffering, but not quite as much as a team, not quite as much as not winning the World Series. I take the number of years since the World Series title before the last one. So, for example, for the A's, if you go back, it's 89. Their previous one was 74. Now, I do that to sort of take into account some of the long droughts that some of the teams have gone through, like the White Sox, like Washington, like the Cubs. But it also is there to take away the suffering for teams that have won multiple World Series titles over the years, like Boston, like San Francisco, like St. Louis. Okay. And I divide that by 8. Then I take the number of years since a team last appeared in a postseason. And this is to take into account some of the teams like Seattle, who has just been in such a long drought. A lot of the teams that have been in vicious droughts got their droughts ending in the truncated 2020 postseason. So the Padres, the White Sox, the Marlins, they all got off the schneid. The Mariners, not so lucky. But I divide that by 16. Then comes, this was a wrinkle that I added in when I put it together. I was trying to think if there's another element of suffering, and that is not just waiting for that title, but those games that slipped away, or more to the point, those series that slipped away. So the number of times your team has been playing a do or die game. They can advance if they win. The number of times your team has been in that situation and lost, I take that number and I multiply it by 10. And this is something that made the Braves number skyrocket because there were a ton of game sevens and a ton of game 5 of the division series and a ton of one game playoffs that the Braves have lost since winning that title in 1995. And so that, to be clear, these are the number of one game playoffs or deciding games that they've lost since their last title. All the previous ones get erased with a title. There's no more Game 7 of the 1986 World Series for Red Sox fans. That's gone. There's no more the games that the Braves, as I just mentioned, those are no longer in your suffering. Those have all been relieved. You multiply those by 10. You take the number of one-game playoffs won since the last title, and you don't multiply them by anything. It's just a number, and you subtract that from the number. You add those together. You subtract the deciding one-game playoffs won, and that is your suffering index. Taking into account the number of years you're waiting, the number of years that you've been waiting to get back to the World Series, back to the playoffs, and the crushing games, that the years that you felt that slipped through your fingers. There's some flawed things in that, to be sure, but if you have a better formula, come write it up. And in the next segment, we're going to go through the results. There's one or two things that stick out. They're going, really? They're suffering more than them? And may point out some of the holes in my system. But again, you'll see that some of the ones that are the lowest suffering, some of the ones that are higher suffering, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And let me tell you something, those fans are going into Thanksgiving wondering, oh man, are we ever going to win? Will we have anything to give thanks for? And I love giving thanks, and I love Thanksgiving. You got all the good food and the treats and plenty of them, but maybe you want a yummy dessert, but isn't so full of calories and sugar. Well, then that's time for the new Thanksgiving tradition of Built Bars. Built Bar is the new holiday dessert. Feast on something delicious and feel good about it. One slice of pie has upwards of 300 calories. And that's on the low end. Most Built Bars are only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and plenty of protein. Replace that coconut cream pie with a coconut Built Bar. Or go for my personal favorite, which is the raspberry Built Bar, instead of that raspberry pie. Lots of good flavors to replace any pie. Low calorie, low carb, low fat, high protein, covered in 100% chocolate. Built Bar is a great option when you're hungry. If Thanksgiving isn't coming soon enough, go for a Built Bar, maybe 2. Share with some at your family gatherings. It'll make things less awkward. Maybe Aunt Betty hasn't tried a Built Bar yet. New surprises all month. Limited time flavors arriving at Built.com regularly. So check the site often. There's nothing like a Built Bar Black Friday. Mark your calendar. Black Friday will be a huge event with all sorts of surprises. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15, you'll get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com for those Built Bars. Okay, I'm going to, at some point, list these results on my personal blog, which is Sully Baseball. And I'm going to post some of these on Twitter as well. But let's go through them, shall we? Which fan base is suffering the least going into 2020? Well, that's the Braves. That's the Braves because their last World Series title was just last year. And none of the negative stats are working against them. Now, you'll see one of the things that makes some of these suffering index numbers skyrocket are the teams that have lost all those deciding games, all those game 7s, all those game 5s of division series, all those wild card games. You'll see there's a few of those who really pad their scores with those. But you'll also see that some of the teams who haven't played in the World Series or haven't played in the postseason really since winning the World Series don't have a lot of game 7s or game 5s lost because the last time they were in, they wiped everything clean. So you're going to see a couple of teams you think have relatively low suffering index, and some other more successful teams have high ones. It all makes sense in the end. But we can all agree Braves fans are the least suffering right now because they just won. The second lowest suffering score. In fact, three teams have suffering index in single digits, and four teams have suffering index in triple digits. So there you go. There are three teams with their fan bases have nothing to complain about. For recent World Series titles, recent postseason appearances, no heartbreaking losses to speak of. You have the Braves, lowest one. Second lowest one, the Red Sox. They've multiple World Series titles. They won a do or die game this year. There's nothing to complain. If you're a Red Sox fan, you got nothing to complain about. And the third lowest one are the Dodgers. Again, with a World Series title recently. Yeah, they got eliminated by the Braves this year, but they eliminated the Giants too. You have nothing to complain about, Dodger fans. The teams with the five lowest suffering indexes are the Braves, Red Sox, Dodgers, I just mentioned, the Kansas City Royals, who won in 2015 and have been boosted by the fact that they haven't been in the postseason since, and therefore they haven't had any heartbreaking losses since then, and the Washington Nationals, again, recent World Series title 2019, no postseason appearances since, so therefore no heartbreaking losses. So those are the five fan bases with the least amount of suffering: Braves, Red Sox, Dodgers, Royals, Nationals. Okay, come the next group, the Giants. Now the Giants actually jumped up because they were, for a long time, battling with the Red Sox for the least suffering, partly because of all those World Series they've won recently. But something that really padded and forced their added 10 points to their suffering index was this year's loss to the Dodgers. That was a do or die game that they lost, and to the Dodgers, and on a check swing. So while Giant fans shouldn't be suffering, that didn't help matters. The Marlins would be the next one, and that's one of the weird wrinkles because they've only made the postseason once since winning those two World Series pretty close to each other, 97 and 2003. And so they haven't had those crushing losses to build up on their total. That's one of the flaws in the formula. I know, but I digress. Then you have the Angels, kind of the same thing, not a lot of heartbreaking losses there. And it doesn't take into account things like the A.J. Pierzynski running to first on what should have been a strike three. Next up would be the Cubs with a recent World Series title, but also some recent do or die losses as well. Most notably the wild card game against the Colorado Rockies. The Astros, even though they have a World Series title, they've dropped a couple of do or die games as well. And so, including Game 7 of the World Series in 2019 and Game 7 of the ALCS in 2020. So that padded it just a touch. Then you have the Phillies, the Rockies. These are ones that are all kind of clumped together. Phillies, Rockies, again, because they haven't a lot of heartbreaking losses there. The Blue Jays, the Diamondbacks. Cardinals are a little bit higher than you expect, but that's been boosted by, say it with me, losing some of the do or die games, including Game 7 of the National League Championship Series in 2012 and this year's wild card game. Then you have the White Sox, and you have Tampa Bay. The Twins are there. You would think the Twins would be higher, but they just can't win. They don't get to do or die games. There's a couple of wild card losses and things like that. And actually, no, there's only one wild card game loss. I apologize. Then you have the Tigers. Now, I would think the Mariners would be higher up there as the only team to never appear in a World Series. They should be higher. This is one of the flaws in this. But you know what? It's my stat. It's my metric. If there are flaws in it, then sue me. I would like to make that a moot point and see the Mariners win the World Series. Padres are next. Again, not a lot of do or die games losses in there. And then we get to the 10 most suffering fan bases in baseball. The 10. That oddly doesn't include the Padres or the Mariners. And guess what? Number 10 is the Yankees. I know that sounds weird to say Yankees are a suffering fan base, but the thing that absolutely makes their total skyrocket are 5, count them, 5 do or die games that they've lost since winning the World Series in 2009. And that doesn't include losing to the Red Sox in the what was it, division series in 2018. That doesn't include the Jose Altuve home run, but it does include losing a game 5 at home to the Detroit Tigers. That does include losing that game 7 to the Houston Astros. That does include losing a wild card game to the Houston Astros and a wild card game to the Red Sox and a game 5 that was horribly managed by the Tampa Bay Rays. All 5 of those years, the Yankees could have advanced since 2009. Right ahead of them would be Baltimore, again, boosted a lot by not uh, having a lot of do or die games that they've lost, although there is the Buck Showalter not using his best pitcher with his game on the line in 2016. The 7th most suffering fan base, and they're probably thinking we're only 7, would be the Mets. The Mets, of course, buoyed by 3 do-or-die game losses since winning the 86 World Series. That includes the Dodgers in 88. That includes the wild card game against San Francisco and includes the called third strike on Carlos Beltran. It doesn't take into account all the other nonsense going on there. The Reds are the 6th most suffering fan base, according to this. And then the Texas Rangers, who were 1 strike away twice from winning the World Series in 2011 and making this a moot point. Which brings us to the 4 fan bases have a suffering index over 100. I mentioned that the Braves, Red Sox, and Dodgers have suffering indexes under 10. Hell, they're all under 6. Yet these 4 have them in triple digits. The Pittsburgh Pirates, who not only have waited 43 years for a World Series title, but have 5 times, can you say it with me? 5 times lost a do-or-die game where they could have advanced if they had won. That includes the Francisco Cabrera game. That includes the games against the Braves in 1991 where they were shut out at home for the final 2 games. That includes a couple of wild card games where they faced Madison Bumgarner one year and Jake Arrieta the next. That includes a game 5 of a division series in 2013 where in game 4 they were 1 swing away from defeating the St. Louis Cardinals and then got shut out by Adam Wainwright. So not only have Pirate fans waited a long time, they've had 5 different years where they said it could have been this year. Which brings us to the 3rd most suffering fan base in baseball. That is the Milwaukee Brewers. Now, I have to explain something. Because this is about fan bases, I included the Milwaukee Braves. Milwaukee fans have seen a World Series title. It was back in 1957 when the Braves were there. They lost the Braves. They didn't have a team for a few years. Then the Brewers showed up, and the Brewers have never won a World Series. And they also have lost their share of do-or-die games. That would include a wild card game. That would include Game 7 of the National League Championship Series in 2018. That includes Game 7 of the World Series in 1982. So the 2 most suffering fan bases. The 2nd most suffering fan base in all of baseball resides in Oakland. And they may be suffering even more as the team is going to be ripped apart and maybe move. I'll believe the new stadium thing when I see it being constructed. I was in the Bay Area long enough to know that they've been talking about the A's getting a new stadium since the late 70s. So let's pump the brakes a little bit on any thought that it's on the verge of happening. Now, the thing that really skyrocketed their total, which is at 136.13, compare that to the Braves, which is 4.69. Okay, it's over 130 points higher than the Braves suffering. The thing that shoots that into the stratosphere are the 9. Which one is it? Which one? Which am I doing here? There you go. 9 do or die games that they have lost since winning the World Series in 1989. All those game 5 of the division series, whether against the Yankees or the Twins or the Red Sox or the Detroit Tigers, or losing wild card games to the Royals, to the Yankees, to Tampa Bay. And that doesn't include the Roberto Alomar home run in the 92 American League Championship Series. That doesn't include losing to the Astros in last year's division series. There have been so many years. Slide, Jeremy Giambi, slide. Swing, Terrence Long, swing. Make that catch, Johnny Gomes, in left field. All these games that slipped through their fingers. All those years where Moneyball 2 would have had a happy ending. And of course, this fan base with the most suffering. And it's going to take me a little while to remember to call them the Guardians, but let's just call them Cleveland. Cleveland, who couldn't even win a World Series in the Major League movies. Cleveland, who saw count them, two World Series where they lost Game 7 of the World Series in extra innings. The only two times that Game 7 of the World Series went into extra innings in the wild card era were both lost by Cleveland. They were one Jason Kipnis foul ball, not hooking foul, away from winning the 2016 World Series. They were essentially 2 outs away from winning the World Series in 1997, making all this a moot point. If both of those things happened, they would have one of the lowest suffering indexes. Instead, they're the highest, and they had to change their name for them. And so they are of the 30 franchises, the team with the biggest suffering. But I had to throw in one caveat, just like I had to bring in Washington's suffering. I'm bringing another fan base, who I think is probably the most suffering. And I ran the numbers, and they would have a suffering index of 84, which would be between the Reds and the Rangers. That would be the Montreal fans. But I have to add 100 points to their total because, A, their best chance to ever win the World Series was wiped clean by the strike of 1994, and their team was so shamelessly gutted by Major League Baseball, made to die on the vine, and they still contended a couple of those years where they weren't given enough money to run a team, and then they've been ripped from the club, taken away from them, and now it's been nearly 20 years. I mean, you could be a 26, 27-year-old person in Montreal with no real memory of the Montreal Expos, which for me is absolutely mind-boggling. Not enough to make me think they should take Tampa Bay's team, because I think Tampa Bay should have a team. But that being said, I think Montreal fans are the most suffering in all of baseball because they don't even have a team anymore. And they saw the team that was once theirs win a title. And that's just not fair. So, and if you want to bet on any of those teams to win next year, some of the teams at the top, Cleveland, Oakland, Milwaukee, and Pittsburgh, are the 4 fan bases that currently have teams that are suffering the most. And I thought the Brewers were going to turn it around this year. I thought they had the pitching. I thought the playoffs aligned perfectly for them. And who knows, maybe if their bats didn't go dead, or let's give the credit to Atlanta for their pitching being good, it just was terrible timing for Milwaukee because they could have been right at the bottom and the Braves would be still somewhere up there. I would have bet everything that the Brewers are going to win that series. And if you're going to make any bets, go to BetOnline. It remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to the new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Use promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, boxing, hockey, UFC, right to your favorite Las Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, so Montreal is not going to have a team in 2022. I hope they get. Baseball needs to expand by 2, and I think Montreal could support a team. But Cleveland, whether they're the Indians or the Guardians, they are the team and the fan base that needs the title the most of all the current teams in Major League Baseball. And the thing that makes it intriguing, other than the fact that this would be a moot point if the Indians had scored 1 run against Aroldis Chapman in the bottom of the ninth of Game 7 of that World Series, or if Jose Mesa had gotten those outs in 97, they would be somewhere in the middle at that point. The thing that makes the Cleveland, it's going to look at. I hated the name Indians. I wanted them to change the name Indians. I hate Chief Wahoo, and anyone who rooted for Chief Wahoo, if you're a Cleveland fan, it was not a good luck charm. You should be happy they're the Guardians right now, but it's going to take me at least a season to not call them the Indians. You're going to have to grant me that. Now the Guardians are going into this season, and they had a season that defined mediocrity. Was a just above 500, and they played using the Pythagorean win losses, exact same record. They were exactly what they were, 80 and 82. They were the definition of a mediocre team. Here's what makes them intriguing and what I think they could learn from the franchise who beat them in the World Series in 1995 and the franchise that they beat in the World Series in 1948, and who are currently the defending World Series champions and whose fan bases have the lowest suffering index of all of baseball. That, of course, would be the Braves. They were the Boston Braves when they last won a World Series. To give you an idea of how long that is, I'm counting the Brewers' World Series tally to include the Braves of 1957. In other words, it's been 2 cities ago that the Braves played in, that the Indians last had a World Series title. Okay, that being said, I'm going to talk to Jeff and everyone from Locked On Indians or Locked On Guardians. Sorry, to talk a little bit about what they have to do. But I truly think Cleveland has a team that could potentially win if they look at the Atlanta model. The thing that Cleveland has that so many teams don't have is really good pitching. They have solid pitching. Even though Bieber only pitched 16 games last year, he was still really good. Tristan McKenzie, he was up and down. He's going to be 24 next year. He had some really great games, some really lousy games, but overall, he's a talented pitcher. So is Quantrill. So is Plesac. So is Chevali. So is Clase, who they got, mind you, in the Corey Kluber trade. So that was more than just a salary dump. He was a fantastic closer down the stretch. Absolutely tremendous closer down the stretch. And you take a look at this team, and they have so much pitching. And it just seems like there's this never-ending supply of new pitchers just coming up through the system. And then, we'll see, are the Logan Allens and everyone, are they all going to fit in? I don't know, but there's so much good pitching on that squad. They seem to have already done the hard part. And if they don't deal Jose Ramirez, who is a really solid player, and they cross their fingers and hope that that Reyes still can hit for power, which he certainly hit for a lot of power last year, they need to look at their outfield. Of course, they trade away Eddie Rosario for Pablo Sandoval, who I don't think even played a game for him. And Rosario wound up being the NLCS MVP. What Cleveland needs to do, and again, I'm not a big believer in taking advantage of some of the financial quirks of baseball, because I think it stinks that teams don't sign free agents, that they try to be mediocre or they try to be bad instead of putting something on the field. But Cleveland plays in a potentially winnable division. Okay? White Sox are a good team, and they earned the division last year. But they're not a juggernaut. Minnesota had a terrible year last year, but they're just a couple years removed from being a 100-win team. Kansas City and Detroit, Kansas City's in full rebuild. I think Detroit's only a year or so away. I think Detroit is putting together something interesting. But if Cleveland could take advantage of their good pitching now, they should look at all the veterans who are left unsigned, especially if there's going to be a lockout. Lockouts, we're going to have a season next year because as stupid as everyone is, they're not that stupid. There'll be a slew of players who need to be signed, who need to prove themselves. This is essentially playing like the actual script of the first Major League movie. Cleveland should sign almost all of them. They should just make sure there's a major leaguer at every spot. And also keep in mind that the team that they break for spring training with may not necessarily be the team that finishes. The Braves cut and pasted an outfield, and virtually everybody they touched turned into a big contributor. Peterson, Duval, Soler, Rosario, they all contributed big time. They don't need a superstar franchise player. Jose Ramirez is a legit all-star. They don't need the big power person to back them up. Reyes is that. They need 3 decent outfielders. I don't know what you're going to get out of Miles Straw. Maybe he's going to be good. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to get out of Josh Naylor. I don't know. Go for depth. Get as many hitters who are dying to prove that they still have something worth and that they have some worth left in their bat. This is also what the Red Sox did in 2013 when they were rebuilding. And they said, well, let's just throw a bunch of veterans in, plug the holes. We're not going to bring up our players too soon. And the Victorinos and the Gomes and the Napolis and the Stephen Drews of the world all happened to click. And next thing you know, Boston was strong and the duck boats were out. The current Cleveland team has better pitching than that Red Sox team. They've got the pitching. They just need to score 4 or 5 runs a game. And when you've already gotten the hard part done, and their team is making their fans suffer, there'll be something poetic about it. And I really, really want the first year of their name change to see Cleveland have a World Series parade. If for no other reason, to stick it to everyone who wanted to keep the team name, that we can say, look at that. Should have changed it earlier, but at least you changed it now. Those fans are suffering. Can you imagine how it would be suffering if the Cavaliers didn't win that one title in 2016? It would be unbearable for them. They do have that title, and boy, do they celebrate. And I think no team would be even, the celebration would be probably biggest for the Browns. But get the Guardians some bats, because their suffering index is at 157.25. Compare that to the Braves, which is under 5. Okay? Get those bats and relieve some suffering. Grab some Built Bars while you're at it too. So follow us on the free and easy to use Odyssey app. Thanks for making us your first listen. And also, if you're going to have your second listen, you know what it should be? It should be Locked On Bets. Locked On Bets is the Locked On podcast for all your gambling needs. You got to follow your boy Q with his expert analysis from Lee Sterling. It's a great podcast. Listen to Locked On Bets. This has been Locked On MLB for the 13th day of November, 2021. Talking about suffering. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.